When application completion rates drop, something is off. Students aren't getting the support they need, and that's affecting your numbers. Enter Element 451's AI assistants. They step in where students struggle, offering real-time answers and advice, guiding them through every step. Learn how AI assistants can boost your enrollment outcomes. Visit element451.com/AI team to learn more.
Welcome to Breaking Silos, a podcast that shines a light on the incredible partnerships happening across campuses every day. I'm your host, Shane Baglini from Muhlenberg College. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher ed marketing, enrollment management, student affairs, campus leadership, and more. Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. My guest today on Breaking Silos will sound very familiar to any NAGAP Summit attendees of past years. If you've been to a NAGAP Summit, you've heard these two present or speak together, or in general have run into them. And so I'm excited to have Fran Reed, the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Marketing at Neumann University, and Keith Ramsdell, Vice President for Enrollment Management at Ashland University. Hi, Fran and Keith.
Hello.
Hey, Shane. We're here today to talk about really, for me, the interesting case of the Vice President for Enrollment and Marketing across higher ed, which is something that I've seen become more and more popular in the past couple of years. So I'm really curious to hear from both of you about, and Keith, we'll start with you, about your current roles and the portfolios that you oversee, but also your general thoughts on why that position is becoming more popular across institutions.
Sure. Thanks, Shane. So I'm at Ashland University, and I've been here now for just about 4 years. I'm sure that this is true for Fran as well, but my portfolio has shifted a little bit over time. So that's one of the things about a VP role, is that what you have when you start doesn't necessarily define what it will always be. So my current portfolio includes traditional undergraduate, transfer, online, international admissions, admissions operations, financial aid, a new initiative in homeschool and classical learning, military and veteran services. I have overseen our marketing and communications department in the past, and I've also seen our corporate connections area. So again, it's kind of a moving target, but the core, and I will add that when I started here, financial aid was not in my portfolio. And so I've only had that for about 2 years now.
Okay. And Keith, that's a lot. That is a lot. So, nobody can be an expert in all of those things. So talk a little bit about how you go about staffing in those different areas to make sure there is expertise in all of those places, because it's hard for one person. It's almost impossible for one person.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's actually one of the things that Fran and I have presented on in the past, very much so with Donald Resnick, our kind of the third party in a lot of our presentations. And what I'll say is this, is that really the goal isn't to be the expert at all of those things. And in fact, Fran knows that, I was very nervous about taking on financial aid, having had, 15 to 16 years exclusively on the graduate side. I didn't have that much experience in undergraduate financial aid, where it is very, very different. And so the first thing that you have to do is, one, feel comfortable with the fact that you're not always going to be the smartest person in the room. And the people around you, including board members, including your president, when you serve in a VPEM role, that's something you just have to message. I have to be okay with the fact that my job isn't to be the expert in all of those things. My job is to hire the expert in all of those things. And so every time I'm in a meeting, I hope that the people sitting around my leadership team, that they are all experts, that they are all on their games. And to be quite honest, my leadership team now, There is not a single person at that table now that was there when I started here 3.5 years ago. Part of that is because of COVID and the turnover in the industry, but part of that is because over time, you just sometimes have to make change. And you've got to make sure that you've got the best possible people at that table and on your team. And if you don't, sometimes you have to make changes.
Yeah, that's great insight. And so, Fran, from your side of things at Neumann, tell us about kind of your portfolio and how it came about at the university, and also certainly interested in your general thoughts on the sort of proliferation of these positions across higher ed.
Oh, absolutely. So I've been in Neumann now for about 4.5 years, so just a little bit longer than Keith. Started right before COVID began. Did not know that was going to happen when I took the job, right? So here we are. But they had done a complete realignment right before I had gotten here. They had a dean kind of enrollment position. They had done enrollment had reported up through academic affairs at one point, standalone. So they had tried different models. It just so happens that the president of our university, Dr. Chris Downs, comes from an enrollment background. So to our advantage, really knew that the impact of this type of position at a university. So restructured the entire thing. Currently, I oversee both the traditional undergraduate enrollment, transfer students, graduate and degree completion, as well as our financial aid operation, admissions operations, as well as our marketing, PR, and our Neumann media, which kind of straddles both the academic side of the house as well as kind of our marketing side of the house. So that's currently what's in my portfolio. But to go after the question you said earlier, and very much what Keith said, you're never going to be the smartest person in the room, and nor should you be, but it truly is hiring the right type of individuals to make sure that your team is successful. And so now, since I've been here, I've hired 2 directors of undergraduate admissions. One just started back in May, and I take a great deal of time in trying to find, it's not just about expertise, also about fit. Because what I find is in order for your team to really work well together, they have to be able to appreciate each other and kind of feed off each other. And so in our leadership meetings that we have every week, I've got my head of financial aid, my head of marketing, head of grad, head of undergrad, even our Neumann media, all part of one team meeting. So we're all kind of learning from each other. And so that's kind of how I've kind of crafted the experts in the room. And that includes our head of our CRM and operations as well.
Yeah, and these are, so the theme I'm picking up on is these are large portfolios, and your advice, both of you, on having people in the room smarter than you is really valuable, because it's hard for maybe people to admit that they're not the smartest person in the room in some cases. And so I appreciate that insight. As we talked about, this is sort of gaining popularity, I think, across the industry. So from the vein of this show, Breaking Silos, Keith, talk about the importance of this position to sort of centralize and unify all of those really key areas that impact really the full student life cycle.
So I could give you my opinion on this, Shane.
Yes, please.
I think you're exactly right. I think that there is a move in this direction toward GEM in particular, graduate enrollment management, being under the heading of VPEM. I will also tell you that for the first 13, 14 years that I worked in GEM, I wasn't in a VPEM model. I was reporting directly to a graduate dean. I was an assistant dean or a director. And so I kind of came into my own thinking that that was the best model. And I wouldn't say the only model, but certainly what I thought was the strong model, the best model. And then at my prior institution at Bowling Green State University, without any input from the graduate dean or from myself, we were moved suddenly, I might add, into a VPEM model with a VP who didn't have any experience in enrollment management at the graduate level and didn't honestly have the time or the desire to some degree to do that. And that's not to knock her. She was an expert at undergraduate and so many other things, as you've already identified. She had so many other things on her plate. And she was trying to run a very large division at a large institution. So I think that the reason that the industry is moving in this direction is that there are certainly some benefits. One is it breaks down those silos. So it allows you to pull some of the best from undergrad, some of the best from grad. You can kind of move some pieces around. And in fact, we're still doing that here at Ashland, where you might have somebody who's really an expert at one thing and they're kind of siloed off from the rest of the team, but you want to get them involved so that the rest of the team can glean some of their knowledge, some of their wisdom, some of their expertise. I think that that's one. Two, I think that given how challenged our teams are to get the job done, we've got to communicate better. And so break down those silos, bring the team together under one larger area called enrollment management, and your communication will absolutely improve over time. And then the result of that course is efficiency.
Yeah.
We all have limited resources, and efficiency is a key. And if you're losing resources, if you're losing personnel, you've got to do everything you can to maximize the team and the resources that you do have.
Yeah, I agree. I think at least in my experience, there's no straighter route to collaboration and communication improvement than having everybody under one roof, so to speak. So that's, yeah, totally agree. And really, my opinion on the VPEM role is that all of these positions and departments work so closely together that it makes more and more sense to have them under one roof. And so, Fran, from your perspective, talking about aligning all those efforts, and you mentioned sort of a reorg at Neumann, and that could be a challenge. It's a culture change for people that are used to doing things a certain way. So advice or from your experience in terms of aligning all of those departments and initiatives together for the folks listening.
So I think change is hard, and I think we've all seen that a lot of institutions are undergoing major change. And so I don't anticipate, just because we've changed to one particular model, and I'm not just talking about Neumann in particular, but I think whether it's new leadership that comes in or others, you'll continue to see things change. And so I do anticipate the role of the VPEM to continue to grow as institutions are trying to figure it out, for lack of a better word, with challenges with enrollment and other things, and in trying to find kind of the right mix. I think for our team here at Neumann, again, I feel I'm very fortunate in the sense that I've got leadership that understands the importance. I view the enrollment management team as kind of the forward facing of the university, but our jobs are not complete unless we are able to deliver upon our message. And so in order to do that, you've got to be in alignment with your marketing PR. You've got to be in alignment with your advancement team. Obviously academic affairs and student affairs. And so we're very much involved with the onboarding process of students to make sure there's a consistent message being said. So they're not hearing from one voice all the way through acceptance, and then all of a sudden you've got others talking to them and it's not the same type of message going through. And so we've tried that consistency. We've done some things really, really well, and we're still working on other things too. And I would say, one of the struggles I think just in higher ed in general is that institutions themselves, divisions, try to own their own thing. And I think that's the hardest part about breaking silos, to be honest, is it's not that you want to step on anybody else's toes per se. It's that we all have the same common goal, right? It's to make sure that our students, whether they're undergraduate or graduate students, are successful and having a good experience as your institutions. And so I think if we all can get on that same page and then bring others into the fold, that's the best that you can do.
Yeah. And that's such a great point about people feeling ownership of their work. One of the themes that's come out in some of the conversations I've had on this show is exactly that. It's people's identity is in the projects that they own, and that's a hard thing to change and get people on board with. And you mentioned leadership, and I would follow up to ask both of you the importance of these roles being a cabinet level position and reporting directly to a president. I would imagine most VPEMs are, but I'm sure there are some that are not. So if both of you, and Fran, we'll start with you, could speak to that, why that's so important in aligning people.
Oh, a great question. In my previous role at my other institution, I was an associate vice president and had reported up through academic affairs. And that's a very common model as well. I think the disconnect there is the benefit of having your vice president of enrollment at the table is because we're involved in the day-to-day in many cases. We understand what's happening with our directors in undergrad, our directors in grad, what's happening out on the field. And sometimes there's conversations that are had at the cabinet level without truly understanding what's really going on. A very easy example is, our message, people are not seeing our message, or we're not advertising enough, or we're not sending out enough communication. And it's very easy for those messages to kind of trickle down, and without kind of a vice president of enrollment or somebody in that position to really kind of explain the process and really understand, I think is one aspect of it. The other aspect is, especially when setting goals, I can't tell you how many times Keith and I have spoken to colleagues who are like, we feel powerless because goals are being set without any conversation with the team. So just setting expectations that are not realistic, or that they don't understand what's happening in the marketplace themselves. And so without that vice president position or being at the table, you can be part of those conversations.
Yeah. And Keith, from your perspective, again, another theme that's come out for me has been the most successful breaking of silos of folks that I've talked to on this show have been from colleagues in leadership positions that are genuinely good friends and colleagues. And so it trickles down from there. So talk about building relationships from that cabinet level and why that also is important in aligning different teams, specifically if there's a restructure or reorg happening.
I'm just going to tag team with her because essentially what you're doing is building bridges. And I definitely consider myself to be a bridge builder, but it's a whole lot easier with fewer layers, right? So when I think about a lot of our peers, a lot of our friends in NAGAP, the issue is that, some of them are directors in a centralized enrollment setting, right? And so you think about that, and how many layers are there between that and cabinet? Well, you still oftentimes, maybe that person is reporting to a dean and that person is reporting to the provost. So you've got at least one layer in there. If you're a GEM professional in a program, you could have 2 or 3 layers in there. Mm-hmm. In our situations, what you've got is, I've got a director or multiple directors who will share concerns with me, and I can immediately take that back to the table next week and say, hey, we've got a problem. We've got a concern. We're lacking resources, and the lack of resources is going to result in X, Y, and Z, right? So you've got opening of doors, you've got building of bridges, you've got whatever. And the big one, and I think Fran's already alluded to this, and Shane, this goes to your point as well, that when you think about who do you need to connect with, the 2 people in particular that a GEM professional may not have access to that a VPEM would is going to be your provost or your chief academic officer and your CFO or your chief financial officer, right? And those 2 individuals, you've got to be sure that you're on the same page. And you're not always going to be on the exact same page, but you need to have a relationship so that they understand that, look, we're in this together and we've got to have the resources to do the job.
Hey, it's Mallory. Element 451 is hosting the AI Engage Summit on October 29th and 30th. This free virtual event brings together leaders, innovators, and many of your favorite Enrollify creators to explore AI's impact on student engagement, enrollment marketing, and institutional success. We're packing the schedule with real examples and case studies, so you leave knowing how to harness AI to drive meaningful change at your institution. Whether you're looking to enhance student outcomes, optimize enrollment marketing, or simply stay ahead of the curve, the AI Engage Summit is your gateway to the next level of higher education innovation. Registration is free. Visit element451.com to save your spot. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, so there's a lot of challenges that come along with that. And I'd like to touch on some of those because it's not an easy thing to do, especially in higher ed, to create a culture like that. So what are some of the challenges, Fran, that you've experienced or gotten advice on that might be beneficial for some of the listeners considering some of these roles?
Absolutely. And I think I've mentioned it earlier. Sometimes it's us versus them, or these silos. And I think it goes back to ownership. Everyone, has a role and responsibility at their institution. And if someone feels, and I hate to say the word like threatened, but thinks that, something that they're doing is being threatened because somebody else is saying they should do it differently. I think those have been some of the biggest challenges. Where I've seen success is, I can't emphasize enough, getting people all in the same room. Because, and I'll use, orientation and kind of onboarding as an example. We have had meetings on a weekly basis all summer long, discussing where things are at. So all the people that need to be involved with the onboarding process of new students are in that room. And so everybody has an opportunity to kind of share their concerns or provide some suggestions and what you would consider kind of a safe space. And we've kind of laid those ground rules from the beginning, that this is not just one person. I mean, there's a team of individuals kind of leading it, but it's not just one individual. And I think sometimes that's where things get stuck, is that there's one person in charge and it doesn't matter necessarily what the rest of the group thinks, that they're going to kind of do it their way. And so that's where I've seen, and that could be hard. I mean, again, we've spoken to colleagues who they have so many layers in between themselves and others that it is difficult. And so I just keep on pressing, you've got to find a way to get involved in the conversation. And sometimes you got to be a little bit more forward and invite yourself to a meeting if that's the case. The worst thing that's going to happen is say, no, but let me hear your concern. And so that's kind of been the best advice I've ever received, and then is what's worked for us kind of as we move forward.
That's great. And yeah, I've been in, I'm not in a cabinet level position, but one of the benefits of my career, and kudos to my supervisors here, has been asking to be invited to a meeting with the president or the provost and getting that experience and really understanding what those conversations are like can really be helpful. How about on your end, Keith? Any advice or challenges that you've personally encountered in one of these roles that would be beneficial for the folks listening?
Shane, you just used the word challenges. And with every set of challenges that you're presented with, it leads to opportunities. And so I think, to Fran's point, having the right people in the room allows you to solve problems together. And so I've been in many, many meetings in this role where you bring 2 or 3 people together in the room and you get so far in the conversation and you go, all right, the right people aren't here. And so in my role, it's a lot easier for me to say, all right, well, we're gonna all meet, but we're gonna bring in 2 or 3 more people. The other thing that's happened, and it shouldn't happen this way, but I've been in meetings before. I've had conversations with some of my team leads before where they've run up against a brick wall with other departments. And it's amazing when I say, you know what, let me deal with this. And I will call a meeting, and I have a large conference table here in my office, and I just bring everybody around the table, and suddenly the tone changes, the attitude changes, the desire to solve a problem changes. And trust me, again, it shouldn't be that way, but I can tell from the look on Fran's face, like it works when you're suddenly at that level. You can say, look, we're not leaving this room until we get an answer to the problem, until we get a solution. We're not leaving this room, and suddenly things get accomplished.
Yeah, I love what you said, Keith, because it's about empowering your teams, because you do want them to be the ones kind of leading in particular areas. But yeah, to your point, sometimes you just have to step in. And I've told my team too. So we may not be experts in everything, but I think the one thing a vice president needs to be is be able to connect the dots. And understand the individual roles. You don't have to know every nitty gritty, but you need to understand the individual roles. And I think that's what's so important.
Yeah, and I think to both of your points, that's where that cabinet level presence comes into play, where, you are basically, this is the directive. And as you mentioned, Keith, we're not leaving the room until we figure it out, where that can be difficult when you're dealing with people with different leaders and bosses from around campus. So that's a really interesting framing for that. This is really for both of you. And Fran, we'll start with you about the future of these roles in higher ed. Obviously we are at the enrollment cliff. We're here. Move-in day is, as we're recording this, is happening across the country, and it looks different in different places. And so I think, personally, I think this role will continue to grow, but I'm curious to hear from you both on your kind of predictions for these types of roles.
I mean, I think we've already started to see the shift. It still surprises me every time, you might get an email from a search firm saying, here's an inaugural vice president position that's starting at a university. And I want to be like, wow, they're still just doing that. And it tends to be at smaller institutions in a lot of cases. But I think everyone is realizing that you truly do need an expertise in the enrollment arena. And so it does look like different things at different institutions, but at the end of the day, it's someone who's kind of leading that charge. I also see, Keith had mentioned when he first arrived at Ashland, financial aid wasn't under his portfolio. And I remember we were having conversations like, I can't believe it's not under your portfolio, because there's such a direct correlation between, enrollment at the undergraduate level and financial aid. And for him not to be part of that, obviously now it's part of his portfolio, but I think this role of a VPN is just going to continue to change. I think you're going to start to see more areas of like student success also possibly be wrapped up in it. And you may see other pieces be taken away. I mean, it's not uncommon for a registrar unit to be under enrollment management either. I mean, there's just so many different variations. And I think it just depends on the type of institution you're at. And also I've found the expertise at the cabinet level. So sometimes maybe the institution has decided not to hire a vice president for student affairs, as an example. And all of a sudden now you have student affairs wrapped up in an enrollment management position. That's happened a lot too. So I think it varies. I would say one thing that concerns me somewhat is because so many individuals have left our field, there is a huge gap. And financial aid is one of them. And it's really scary, the amount of people who have kind of left that profession. And there's not a long line of people waiting to come in. And so what's happening is you are relying on kind of third-party vendors, partners, to fill those gaps. And I had said this probably even like 8 years ago, that I felt that institutions were at some point could be outsourcing admissions offices because they just can't fill the gap. I think it's expensive. It may be affordable, but it seems like it's getting more expensive to work with third parties. So I think some institutions there are pulling back. So it's going to be interesting, Jane, in the next few years to see where institutions are at. They may have to bring in third parties because they can't fill the gaps in their workforce.
You mentioned, what does this look like for younger folks? And I think that there are still great career opportunities in graduate enrollment. I'm not going to back away from that. I really think that there are, but it's not for the faint of heart. It's not the same career, even when you started, Shane, and I don't know how long you've been in it, but it's not that many. You're younger than both of us, I'm sure. But the bottom line is that it's not the same career that you went into as when I went into it. And it's not the same today as when you went into it. And so I think that people have to go in eyes wide open and say, look, if this is what I want, why do I go into it? It's no different than what we say to our students, right? What is the return on investment? What is the driving force? What is the thing that's attracting you? And it can't be the money. And it can't because somebody's going to pat you on the back at the end of the day or at the end of the week, right? It has to be because you think and believe in your heart that you can make a difference in the lives of students, right? That's the only reason you can do this job. And if you believe that, it's absolutely true and it's worth going into. And again, the challenges are plentiful. I just came out of another conversation before logging in here where I was asked about, what are the challenges? I said the challenges are plentiful. I mean, between the enrollment cliff, which if we all believe that that's only an undergraduate thing, we're kidding ourselves, right? It's already hitting graduate, students coming out of their undergraduate program. It's going to hit graduate if it hasn't already. Cost is a factor. We've got all these students who are coming out of their undergraduate programs, tens of thousands of dollars in debt. And on the graduate side, we're being told that our job is to generate revenue to make up for losses on the undergraduate side. And we all know we're already stretched. It's unlikely to happen at most of our institutions, right? So we have to be able to sell what essentially has become a commodity. And so part of this, and again, the VPEM model, I'll just be quite candid. Part of this is pushing your academic side of the house, pushing even your president to a point to say, look, we have got to have a product to sell that is needed in the marketplace, that is conveniently offered at a price point that people can afford. And if you can't do that, you're not likely to be very successful. And the small to mid-sized schools, and Fran and I are unfortunately in situations like this, it's a challenge. We're definitely going to have our challenges in the years ahead. The larger schools, the R1, maybe R2 schools are maybe going to have it a little bit easier. We're going to have our work cut out for us. Again, though, it's worth it. If you're driven by student success and the difference you can make in students' lives, the career choice is worth it.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And I'm also glad that you brought up the 4 Ps there, because it's an important lesson that I think part of our job as marketers and enrollment leaders is to educate the rest of campus on exactly what that means. And Keith, you and I did a webinar not long ago where this topic came up, and it generated a lot of conversation on that webinar, because it's something that I think people listening to this are going to perk up and say, hey, I've been saying that. So I appreciate that insight. And as we wrap up here, you've both touched on the career aspect of this, and a lot of our listeners are, mid to younger career professionals. And Fran, you mentioned getting the sort of the recruiter firm emails about these VPEM roles. So somebody considering one of these roles that either has expertise on the marketing side, the enrollment side specifically, or maybe combines two, what would be some of your advice for them to consider when thinking about, can I balance all of this?
Absolutely. I think you have to if you have the opportunity to kind of get your feet wet in different areas. And so I say this all the time, it's get a little taste of, financial aid. So if you're coming from a GEM background, typically financial aid is not a huge component of your work. And so it's trying to talk to, your internal director at your institution, see if they'll be willing to share newsletters and listservs with you, just so you can become familiar with terminology. And that's just one example. I would also get yourself involved with different committees on campus. So if you're not immersed in kind of the academic side in some capacity, start to see if you can get involved in that area, because it's really important to understand how programs come into development, accreditations, all those types of things are very, very important in your role. And then you've got the student affairs kind of side of the house, and understanding some of those roles and responsibilities. Again, I think Keith and I probably nailed this spoke about this to death, but you don't have to be an expert in everything, but you've got to at least have an understanding of the different aspects at the university. And again, VPN roles are going to be different across the board. So it's important to kind of understand those different nuances. But as long as I think you understand enrollment management, you understand the tools and resources available to be successful in that kind of capacity, then if you aspire to be a dean or a vice president, you can absolutely get there. And I think if you're coming from a gen background, I think that gives you an added advantage, because in lots of cases, you are immersed maybe with academics versus your undergraduate counterparts. And so use that to your advantage in many of your cases.
Yeah. Great advice. And as you mentioned before, don't be afraid to be not the smartest person in the room. And Keith, how about on your end of things, advice for younger professionals, somewhat like myself, that are having to do both things out of necessity, and more than both things, do a lot out of necessity of being on a small team, or advice on sort of building that expertise, or in some cases overcoming some imposter syndrome that you might think, I can't do both of these jobs.
I still have imposter syndrome, so I can't necessarily speak to that. I will say, and I'll repeat again what Fran has said: financial aid, financial aid, financial aid. If your goal is to go into to become a VPEM, you've got to do something in advance to catch up on that. Because I went through a number of VP searches where I ended up being number 2 or number 3, and the reason I can tell you with all certainty, the reason that I did not get the pick was because I didn't have enough experience in financial aid. So I think that's really critical. I think understanding the undergraduate recruitment model is really important. If you think about territory management and those types of things at the graduate level, we simply don't do that. Yeah. I had almost a decade of undergraduate experience, and so that was not a big deal for me. I think operations is critical. And that's something that you can pick up on. I mean, if you're familiar with Slate, you can go a little bit deeper and figure out, what does that look like? What does that mean? Other areas, though, that I think are absolutely essential, and it's very difficult to get experience in these. One is staff management. And when I say that, I mean, I came out of an assistant dean director role at a large, institution, and my staff was 7, 8 people. And I came here and suddenly I was supervising 50. That is a massive difference, right? The dynamics, all the things that go on, and managing various teams and various directors at different levels, that's difficult. And the other thing, and I find myself doing this a lot, and again, this is something you can't necessarily plan on, but I'm sure Fran spends more time doing this than she cares to. Negotiating contracts and third-party vendors, and working with your legal counsel, and that is some of the stuff that it's like I would prefer not to do those things, but that's part of the job, and so you can't get out of it. That just goes along with the territory.
Yeah, all great advice. I would add, Seth Odell said this on another Enrollify show, but if you be able to hang in a conversation with your CFO is really important. You don't have to be an expert, but be able to keep pace. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. They should make them one of your best friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure.
Well, Fran and Keith, this has been a real treat. I appreciate your time. I hope our listeners enjoyed it. And I hope to see you both at the summit next year, if not before.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your hosts. Learn from Dave Cabilds, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and many more of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.